que é RMF 5521 Rio de Janeiro, Brasil. Today I think that is the 17th, is it correct? 17 August 2021. We will make our movement today after change the connection at the light, I would say the energy, because we had something that got down, you know maybe we had a big charge, and that instrument that provides the energy didn't support it. They didn't could have that charge properly. So we will observe that we had this situation here, which is systematical violation despite all advices made. But if you are so much in a corruption scam and you use so many instruments of control to commit crime, that we consider a mental illness, like a cretinism. We have the financial factory, which is an operation. I have a big amount of money that can be charged, and I will transfer this, receiving a piece anticipated and as unique payment. If I have 33 trillion, 3 trillion is something, rational and a piece of cake. And then we can have divisions again. But this financial factory will allow me to have a criminal research, and I can use this causal relation that create this right as compensation, which is presented at a negotiable instrument named financial paper, and it's an operation named factory. Research one matrix with banks, budgets, and contracts. In general, we can have here instruments or interface with specific signs on it. And we have accounts, decisions, and signatures signed at those specific instruments that are used to be signed, but they are having signatures for control. And these two matrix by complementarity form a new one that you didn't observe, but indeed exists. It's the complementary is a relation, and we can observe this relation by a behavior named relationship. And the frequency the frequency of relations that we have sometimes expose things that are a little bit deeper than a simple relation, because this relation has a functional behavior despite it's not explicit or pulverized. And then we will observe the physification of a relation with continuity as association or continual association, and instrumental use to achieve specific results indeed is a function. This function can, it doesn't matter if it's red or blue. If it's not a function, standard, it may be a function that you must review. Then we had this situation, which was the distribution macro and micro with distortion as relation with continuous stochastic process until have a density as capacity with functionality outline. Indeed, will put the limits of my regular and standardized pattern of do things in risk. This can happen at the limits that you have to buy things at your budget, or the limit that you consider have the flow of people around the globe, and you will observe that this loss of integrity at the limits indeed will allow maybe to replace some arguments inside that matrix, which is a matrix of control under a corrosive risk as possibility. And according with the frequency observed at micro and macro behavior inside this matrix of control, we can observe a conjunctural risk as possibility, from the arena, I would say, as control. And this comparative model with bank account, budget decision, contracts, and signatures presented as failure attribute inside a function of control, which can be, related with areas that must be under review by those failures. Indeed, we are having the law and order theory reviewed. It's named this process the broken window. When you have, according with this theory, New York 80s, the window broken, you must, interrupt this process to prevent that all windows got broken, and then the people will try to burn the house and do a lot of things, and will shit inside the, main room. Then we observe that to have this reality safe, we created a model, which is basically considered the international martial trial, able to have judgment not considering the regular martial trial in areas with conjunctural failures presented at the macro environment as control, as the database sigma, or a multi agreement of nations to have the control like the NATO. Because if we had, a illness mind like we observed at the Brazilian public budget as cretinism Brasilis, we will do a regressive analysis considering that if we had this risk as possibility at the big arena of control as the NATO, for sure we have the incremental and the stochastic behavior to have this at the conjuncture and the local area, and we are proving our argument, which is against the corruption local associated with international, to have the localization of international crime by local corruption. Get the interface, have the things. Then we consider this international martial trial according with the development of those flows that goes around the globe in a physiological way, to prevent sometimes structured values against main premise that can help to set the homeostasis of the global system and organizations of society, which is basically, have things, each thing in the place which this thing belongs. Then we will observe that the type of flow as value combined with the flow as itself give me the evaluation, and I have registry in general using the budget considering the financial area, and all this not observed at the COVID-19 interval before Brazil 2012-2021. All we have that speech all under flagrant delict. Indeed, it's like this. Please FBI review with the Chicago School this theory. And we had on mind that this situation is helping to have our international accusation. considering the complementarity of fields, you know, the result will be the same result, only with the different as composition. It means that the structural premise for sure counts a lot. And if we have structural violations at the standard patterns of financial statements, financial registry, accountability and transparency, considering banks of investment, for sure, baby, we have secondary lines of investment and transference around the globe. Considering failures at conjuncture, the distribution of these will set designs, structural designs oriented by failures around the globe, with systematical events around the globe. Looks like that we had one pattern very curious that maybe was observed at the America two different fields, distortion and failure of both integrate and take advantage by themselves against both different sides, with failures that control setting a new interest as the third way. This was presented as the function, as density, presented as failure, changing the limits, which is the difference between two sides, to both corrupted. We have the approach. And this was observed considering the Eurozone, ATT, we are working with the big techs in the same way. The big tech, we have a lot of them as a consumer. I like to have things with a bit of secure, especially at the fintech, which is integrated. It's not financial, it's not technology, it's fintech. But under a factorization, we will have things, in each place, especially when you must have the statement separated, because the decision about investment sometimes is $1 billion. In present time, in my case, maybe $1 trillion. And I have the decision as transference for the anti-crime body, as purpose to have a boat to put you international criminal inside, and you'll be, a comfortable boat, because maybe you got dead inside this boat, especially if you are too old. So, but I'm very concerned with your health, mental health, and a lot of things. And yeah, we will observe. Now, the presentation of today, which I had different squares around the globe. And I have the west, I have the east, and I have the center as middle. And I have failures inside, which are circles. Those failures are ruled and oriented according with the distribution as global events. And this happens to have, the flexible arguments, especially at the premise and legal system. You must use the top left. Then you segmented these fields of interest and put them here. We changed them. They are distributed, now they are at the top. Consider those interests, now you expel them and put them here. And we had this as the Venn diagram. But your situation here will have a structural failure. It will be like this. Now your square is with a structural failure. And of course that anyone can take advantage of this structural failure, except if you do that statics operation, when you put things on your face, you become younger, something like this. it will be like this. You will transfer people from those areas that have autonomy, independence, guts, and will to fill those areas, you know? And they set a steering committee, very strictly, very legal, with a budget as 33 trillion. Then the other situation that you have, because it's a dynamic model against very complex patterns of criminality, they won't be all the time like this because they have their own sovereignty and premise as national states, and they respect all these and tradition and cultures. And we will have the factorization of this area here. We'll have the factorization of this area here. Indeed, this area is filled by this holographic standard pattern of control that had a failure and allowed me to have the conclusive argument for judgment and martial trial as conviction about systematical failure in all those areas. you know and we will have for local specific things the factorization of this area, despite it's not factorized as something forever, I would say, because you once in a while will have this kind of summit as a big reunion or steering committee to review all areas. And for sure we are doing this when we consider the physiological aspect at the COVID-19, and when you claim vaccines all the time, and sometimes you use the Supreme Court to order that the government must have the vaccine or something like this. In Brazil, we have a constitution on Article 65, which is about the budget law as a structured plan which present the problem of government and all things, considering all institutional and democratic powers and the military force, all with failures, corruption, drug use, a lot of problems. Then, but it's something that belongs to the chief as the president. And this, we have a 4-year structure as a strategic plan, and in general we'll give very general things as directives, objectives, and a measurement that I can use. It's written there. And we have a 2-year instrument, which is a tactical plan, I would say. This tactical plan, in general, we will have my targets and my priorities, because I have limited resources. For instance, if you'd like to do coke all the time at the Congress or whatever, using the public budget, for sure you will have compromised other areas, as security, as the health, as the stability of the entire system. And you must avoid this, because drug indeed is something very risky and not good for your health. And in a nearby year, you have your annual plan as the budget as itself, which will have that structure and as debt and credit to both at the financial public account, which has a creativity account considering one unique amount of money transferred as a sequential circuit and broke the entire things. And so if you do this at the vaccine, for sure you maybe will have a problem. Fraud management inside the financial system. Article 4, Law 7,400, I think 92/86. If you take a look at the Law 4,320, Articles 42 up to 46, you will have the concurrent association between the Congress, the government, to have those planning activity by budget. And we have, extraordinary and use for emergency and things like this. And the vaccine, all things, is something emergency. It means that you have this money separated. And when you consider that this is your main priority, we must ask you why you are taking the chair, I would say, and the pen of the president according and violating our constitution one more time to have this. Do you consider that you could have, by inference, something very special at these vaccines to have so much interest on it? And sometimes it's something that you didn't have the proper lead time as development and research at medical area to present this curious thing. And we will observe, I think that we have enough. Maybe we will have the continuity of this conversation, but I think that it's not enough. It's not necessary. When we have, for instance, a physiological element or argument or resource going on and on as a flow inside your company, like a poison. If you are putting a poison inside your company as rotten credit or rotten investment, you will cut this line to have this entrance inside your company. If you have a lot of problems at the COVID-19, considering the vaccine and all situations related as argument to have this transference, you will have here is your financial system. Here you have two empty intervals considering the transference as coming and going. Debited, credit, COVID anything is the name of this interval. And your line will be just like this model here, presented as something like this, because sometimes the Venn diagram is limited. All models have limits. But the interval notation allows to have this. Then I have a disruptive event at the financial system, which is something like this. But this area here indeed exists. It's under international audit. Considering the fintech, we will observe that, for instance, you have financial arguments on both sides, right? That's debit and credit. We have technologies related with these two both sides, right? And we have some areas here as a concurrent interest, letter C, named fintech. But when we do the factorization of this, we are observing that there are failures at the both sides, And now those failures are exposed as something like this. Can you get it? And they are under the observation of this steering committee around the globe to have the conviction at our Marshall trial. Beautiful theory, isn't it? Have a nice night.